me with my money.
I've been playing a lot of shorter games recently. I guess I've just kind of been in the mood for some less cognitively demanding experiences since my last video, partially because making a video just takes up a lot of time, and partially because every time I've started an RPG in the past year, I've ended up losing all of my save data. So a couple months ago, I downloaded a 4GB zip file just full of like a bunch of arcade games, and that might not sound like much nowadays, but you have to remember that games back then were like 5 kilobytes, so that's at least, what, maybe 100 games? That's probably a bit of an underestimate, honestly. The last time I've even played most of these games was a couple years ago when I still lived in Chicago with the Galloping Ghost, but they don't really have anything like that where I live now, so until a couple months ago when I started getting back into fighting games, the arcade side of gaming just wasn't something I had really interacted with much in a while. So I'm really looking forward to revisiting some of my favorites and maybe making some new ones. And hey, case in point, Altered Beast. I've been playing this game for pretty much as long as I've been playing video games, which is really weird to think about, but over the years I've become intimately familiar with pretty much every aspect of this game. Like, I have the exact way each digitized line is delivered completely memorized, every color, every song, and I'm not even good at this game. I've played this game so many goddamn times, this is probably my 4th time playing it through all the way, and I still have no idea how it fucking works. I've gotten better over time and understand the intricacies of the gameplay, but I've just never really been able to get good at it.
Rise from your grave.
Altered Beast takes place in ancient Greece, where you play as an undead guy revived by Zeus and given the powers of the Altered Beast to save Athena from the evil Neph and his 4 identical siblings. The first level is very heavy on the undead stuff. It takes place in a graveyard, all the enemies are zombies, you yourself are a zombie technically, but I really like how this level feels. I've always thought that zombies are the scariest in the daylight. I feel like the contrast to this completely unnatural being, literally the physical manifestation of the fear of death, slowly shambling around while the sun still continues to shine, is such an interesting visual. It's sort of like the visual of the zombie is canceling out the hope of a new sunrise, and the sunrise it's canceling out the fear of the zombie, just leaving you feeling kind of empty, like I guess there's nothing we can do now. I'm not gonna pretend that the game is scary, because it's not, but there's definitely a bit of a creepy atmosphere here that I will stand by saying was completely intentional. I had never really realized it before, but the level progression definitely shows a descent into hell, or Hades in this case, I guess. As the game goes on, the levels get grimier, darker, the enemies start becoming stranger and more monstrous. It really does feel like a journey into hell in a way that other games that have done this sort of level theming really don't. Probably because those other games are Mario. The one time it lets up in atmosphere and enemy design is also directly before the final level, where the set design gets more fucked up than it's ever been, and somehow the fact that the enemies are like the most normal they've ever been kind of makes them the weirdest in the game. Like, we've spent the whole game fighting exploding zombies and slimes that look like this and stampedes of bipedal wasps, but the fact that this area interprets Greek mythology in such a comparatively normal way makes the design so much more impactful, and the rest of the design's a lot more interesting by extension.
Welcome to your doom.
The bosses in particular have some of my favorite monster designs in, like, anything. It has that Zelda design philosophy where it's kind of utilitarian, as in they're more designed around how the fight itself works instead of the other way around. If a monster is only going to use its head and its hands in its attacks, just make it a giant head and hands. If a monster doesn't move, just take away its legs. I love Octo Eyes for this reason. It's literally just a bag of eyes. It's disgusting. The Cave Snail is the kind of monster that can kind of only work as a video game character. The whole concept of its design only really works because of the way you fight it, and it doesn't really make that much sense to design unless you actually are fighting. You need to actively be pressing the buttons and engaging in the fight for it to fully make sense as a monster, and I think that's really great. I also think it's funny how the dragons that the crocodile worm spawns are just palette-shifted shrunken were-dragon sprites. They never look as small or as big as they feel like they're supposed to. It's like an optical illusion. So Altered Beast is kind of a combination of a fighting game and a beat-em-up, which is kind of weird to say considering how closely linked those two genres already are, and how comparatively little this game resembles either genre. It has ducking, jabbing, kicking, even high jumps and anti-airs that would feel right at home in a fighting game, except there isn't any guarding, so it's more about trying not to let the enemy get close to you in the first place, trying to find the right way to approach each enemy to the point where you won't get comboed to death by them, because once you get one hit on the enemy, you can pretty much just kill them right there as long as you aren't getting flanked by another enemy, and that's the same for them to you. It's about trying to manage hordes of monsters coming at you from all sides through a moveset with a satisfying amount of weight to it, where each attack can either be a gateway into defeating an entire wave of enemies, or into losing a bar of energy yourself if time drawn. Once you figure out that loop, the game becomes a lot more enjoyable. The main thing you're on the lookout for throughout each level is these wolves, which are referred to as three-headed wolves for some reason, even though they very visibly only have two heads, both in sprite and official art. There are brown wolves and white wolves. The brown wolves don't do anything, but the white wolves will drop a spirit ball when they're killed, which will power you up to 3 times, the third time into an altered beast form. You have to be careful once you start seeing brown wolves, because it's a tell that the white wolf is probably about to start barreling towards you at top speed. If you get hit by either wolf, you've pretty much lost that spirit ball. Every third of the way through the level, or every 3 wolf packs, you'll see Neff, or one of Neff's identical brothers, and if you've killed all the wolves up to that point and gotten to Altered Beast, you can start the boss fight right there, but if not, he'll run away and the level will continue to loop until you've gotten all the spirit balls. The end goal for each level is essentially to be able to get good enough at it to the point where you only have to go through a single loop, because the more loops you go through before the fight, the more time you waste and the less points you get on kill. The wolves are actually pretty interesting as enemies because, unlike the rest who have a set AI, the wolves' behavior changes depending on where they are in each level, so you're never really able to tell how one will react unless you've played the game enough times to be able to memorize it. Sometimes they'll jump towards you slowly, sometimes they'll form a pack and dart at you, sometimes they'll just stay completely stationary, which usually means that you've looped too many times and the game's essentially just handing out power-ups now. There is one kind of big thing that I'm not huge about in this game though, one that kind of puts a damper on the whole experience, and that's how the continue system works. From my experience, there are 2 types of arcade games, score attacks and adventures, adventure not referring to the genre. In score attacks, when you run out of lives, that's it, you're done. Put in another coin and try again. The main goal of the game is trying to get the highest score rather than trying to finish it, so being able to put in another coin to keep playing would just be kind of annoying to everyone else in the arcade. Adventures are more like what you see nowadays, where the goal is to get to the end of the game, so when you die, a continue screen pops up and you can put in a coin to keep playing. You see this a lot in beat 'em ups, fighting games, shmups, light gun games. So, what does that mean for Altered Beast? Altered Beast came out around the time that adventures began to dominate, a year after Double Dragon had come out, which sparked a boom of beat-em-up games and adventure games by extension, but Altered Beast specifically feels like it didn't really know how to implement these mechanics properly. There are a lot of enemies in Altered Beast that are annoying, if not impossible, at least without losing a life, to kill in your base form, particularly in the last level, though it shows up a lot in some of the earlier ones. The reason this matters is essentially that the wolves are extremely hard to kill, especially in some of the later levels, meaning that you're going to have to do at least 2 loops of a level on your first playthrough, which is a fair punishment, I feel, but if you miss just one other wolf on that first loop, you might as well just restart the game, because you're going to spend the rest of that level continue scumming. The way the power-ups are implemented is cool in theory, but in practice it just doesn't work very well. In most good games, you're able to manage without power-ups. The power-ups just make things easier, usually with a slight risk to obtaining or retaining the power-up. In Altered Beast, the absence of a power-up makes things significantly harder, and missing a power-up, which is really easy to do, punishes you by forcing you to play a longer level with a weaker character. I mean, I don't necessarily consider it a bad system. It's not really as much power-ups as it is unlocking more abilities as the level progresses. You just have to be able to memorize the patterns. It's a staple of arcade games, my favorite part of arcade games, playing the game over and over, memorizing each part of the level to the point they are able to pull it off effortlessly. Why would it be any different in Altered Beast? Why am I so sour on the way this mechanic works? When you give a player an option to continue a game, that's saying that you should continue the game. You can keep fighting until you're out of quarters. You can finish the game. When a game doesn't give me that option and I have to restart, the game is telling me that I need to start paying attention to everything that's happening and memorize it so I don't have to start over again. It resets because it's giving you an opportunity to pay attention to the patterns and also for money. And despite how it looks, Altered Beast is the latter. It's a memorizing game, a learning game. It's a score attack game. I shouldn't be given a cue to continue through a level when I'm at a point in it when I literally cannot continue any farther without continue scumming. I have no power-ups, I'm on my 3rd loop, and every time I respawn I'm dropped into a sea of enemies that I haven't had time to learn yet. So, do I just restart the game? Or do I put in 50 more quarters and power through? And this is all annoying enough when you're just playing it through emulator, but when this game was actually around, I feel like this is just a gigantic scam. The Genesis version is at least a bit better, where there are no continues, so each death makes you restart from the beginning of the game, or if you know the cheat code from the beginning of the level you're on, it feels more manageable, but the Genesis version is kind of bad. It feels uncomfortably floaty, the animation and sprites are all very noticeably worse. It's an unfortunate damper to a really genius game with a lot of good ideas, but I guess until a game can show me a way to implement continues in a way that allows for some mistakes while still giving consequences for poor gameplay, I guess we're just out of luck. Ooh, foreshadowing. But come on, I'm not ending on such a sour note, especially not with this game. Altered Beast's ending is so perfect and satisfying feeling. They show you photos of all the set pieces from your journey, rendered in really beautiful 90s Sega pixel art, just like the rest of the game to be fair. And then, in a really weird move, they reveal the game to all have been a movie production. The general consensus I've seen from people under YouTube comments and GameFAQs posts is that a lot of people seem angry at the ending, if not kind of baffled, but I don't know, I kind of like it. The first time I finished the game, it was after like half an hour straight of playing it, which I know isn't that long, but it feels long for this game. After having played it for basically my whole life and never having finished it, I don't know, it felt really satisfying. I feel like what a lot of people aren't really getting is that it's not really supposed to be literal. It's not trying to tell you that all you did was for nothing, even though I don't know I'd be so invested in the story of Altered Beast. It's like peeling back the curtain. You're one of the lucky few that's gotten to finish this game, and the team wants to personally thank you for that. It was probably a pretty important project to them. It was their second game as Team Shinobi. It was Makoto Uchida's first directed game. The characters at the end aren't just fictional actors celebrating a finished movie, it's Team Shinobi, toasting to a successful launch, and to you, not just for playing the game, but for finishing the game, caring enough about the game to keep playing, keep trying, and win. That's something I've always loved about Sonic 1, just how much of a celebration of Sega itself that it feels like. Green Hill's dirt is made up of checkerboard patterns that Space Harrier had used in its simulated 3D, the palm trees are all polygonal as if to show off the bright future of gaming that they wanted to create. Marble Zone is a pretty clear homage to Altered Beast, as the previous pack-in game for the Sega Genesis before Sonic, and most obviously, Flicky is here. Like, just not even an homage or a reference, it's just actually Flicky. I'm pretty sure that everyone who's played Sonic knows that Flicky is from another game, but I don't think a lot of people have played it, and if they have, not really given it the time of day that I think this game deserves. In Flicky, you play as Flicky, a blue bird who needs to traverse through a preschool collecting Pio-Pio, or chirps, but my copy says Pio-Pio for some reason, so I'm gonna keep saying Pio-Pio, and carry them all to the exit, all while avoiding the dastardly tigers and A's. It's a simple premise, which is always good for score attack games, but where the game becomes really compelling is where the concept of leading around smaller animals is baked into every single aspect of the gameplay. When you collect a Pio-Pio, it starts to follow behind you, and will jump a little after you jump. The more Pio-Pio you have, the more time it'll take for the ones at the end to start jumping, but it'll also increase the amount of points you get when depositing them at the door, so ideally you only want to return there once you've gotten all the Pio-Pio in the level. You'll lose a life when you touch an enemy, obviously, and you'll appear back at the entrance, but you'll leave behind all the Pio-Pio where you died, and if you don't get to them quickly, they'll start to scatter and become really annoying to recollect. On top of that, if an enemy touches a Pio-Pio that's following you, it'll disconnect from your chain along with the ones following behind it, so once the chain starts getting longer with the increase in Pio-Pio in the later levels, you start really needing to plan your paths pretty intricately. Sometimes you might need to jump way before you even get to an enemy so it doesn't touch any of the Pio-Pio behind you. Flicky has a sort of floaty-ish jump, one that doesn't hold momentum when you hit a ceiling, so you can sort of fly over the enemies a little bit in a way that's super satisfying. Layered throughout the stages, taking many different forms, including empty beer bottles, are throwable objects that you can use to temporarily get rid of enemies. They have some interesting physics to them that can be really handy once you get a feel for how they work, and very occasionally enemies will drop diamonds when killed that can give you a huge score boost, especially when you're carrying a bunch of Pio-Pio with you, so it's definitely worth it to try to kill enemies when you can. But here's the catch. The throw button is the same as the jump button, and the Pio-Pio often are flying in the air or on upper platforms, requiring you to jump to collect them. So a lot of times it'll be a trade-off, wasting your weapon to collect a Pio-Pio and leaving yourself in a bad place when you encounter an enemy later, or jumping over a weapon to save it for later just to end up running into an enemy and needing it anyway, wasting a bunch of time. And therein lies the other twist. time. Every single second you spend in a level is counted, and the longer you spend, the less bonus points you get at the end of each level. Every time you need to round up Pio Pio after having them knocked off by an enemy, maybe 500 points off your score. Every time you mess up a jump, 1,000. Every time you think, well, I don't want to waste my weapon jumping, so I guess I'll just wait by the enemy spawn point. You just lost the bonus altogether. And I think a lot of people who don't really play games like this can kind of just view points as inconsequential numbers that pop up in some old games for no reason, but they're remnants of arcade games, and in arcade games they were extremely useful, because the more points you got, the more lives you got, the lower the chances of you having to completely restart the game, and more importantly, the lower the chances that you'll have to waste another quarter. It's a really addicting balancing act between all the different mechanics, and once you get into a flow, it's super fun. I've always felt like some of the best arcade games are the ones that can really get you into a flow, be it score attack or otherwise. I've been getting embarrassingly into Pac-Man recently. Like, I know the patterns and shit now, that's embarrassing, but I really like how you get into a mindset through those first couple levels, to the point when the patterns stop working, you're still able to do it automatically, because you've pretty much become Pac-Man at that point. You are one with each other. It's really fucking cringy that the Tetris company keeps trying to push the Tetris effect as a thing, though. Like, dude, shut up. Our game is so addictive that the people who play it see it while they sleep. It's even been proven to improve brain function. Shut up. It's really interesting, though, when that's sort of thrown out the window by a game, when instead of having a really simple format that you can become good enough at reading over time that it becomes second nature, you sort of spice it up with an element of unpredictability and a more complicated set of controls. I don't really know that much about Bomb Jack. I know that there's an NES sequel that I played like a minute of when I was still paying for Nintendo's terrible online subscription. I know about the Rage game's spiritual successor that was in Meat Boy, and that's it. I pretty much know nothing past that. So Bomb Jack is a superhero, I guess, who battles against the forces of in order to retrieve bombs from various locations around the world. It's never spelled out what Jack is actually doing. Like most arcade games, pretty much everything is just to serve the readability of gameplay. That's why it's so funny to me that the bombs never actually explode at any point. There's not like a time limit or a button to throw the bombs you collect. I think the idea is that you're supposed to be defusing the bombs, since you get more points when you prioritize the currently lit ones, so that would make sense. But it's still funny to me that during the peak of function over form in game design, they chose an object with such a specific and well-known function for your collectibles. I like to describe Bomb Jack as Gravity Pac-Man. It has the same general rules as Pac-Man, even down to an equivalent to the Power Pellet, except instead of just getting to move wherever you want, you have to jump everywhere. It might be kind of confusing at first, because in most platformers you're able to control the speed and height of your jump depending on how long you hold down the button for, but interestingly enough, that wasn't even really a thing until Super Mario Bros. Came out the next year, which is really weird to think about. It does have what I guess you could call an analog jump, but it's pretty different here than it was in pretty much every game that came after it. So along with being able to adjust your X-axis while airborne, you can also use the stick to adjust your Y-axis, so you can use that to gain more momentum and height like you would in a modern game, speed back into the ground, but interestingly you can even mix and match while you're still airborne. For example, you could start off with a normal jump, speed it up a bit for a bit extra height, speed downwards to avoid an enemy, and then use the jump button to float down to collect some bombs, all in the same jump. It's super in-depth, and like all arcade games, it's really hard to get good with, but once it clicks, it really clicks. The game basically shows you the pattern from the beginning with the lit bombs, but the enemies are so unpredictable that you can't really rely on that pattern entirely. At first, they're just these mischief makers looking ass mummies and this bird, but pretty soon not only do they start multiplying, but they also start transforming. The way the enemies look in this game is so surreal. I love it though. I really like how everything in this game is covered in gradients and flashing lights, like they're trying to show off the new technology, but Jack himself is just this stupid little guy. The whole aesthetic of this game with the flashy gradients and rainbows and like those weird ass backgrounds kind of make this game feel like some sort of low budget carnival. Like in the far future they've invented flight suits to strap people into for attractions at fairs, in the same vein as like laser tag, I guess, but they're still riding off that same look they had in the 50s. I don't know what it is with me and carnivals lately. Also, I really love how this game handles its rainbows. I think it's cool that depending on the color of the P circle when you collect it, Jack will be that color for the duration of it. I love the weird ways old games would try to indicate that something is powerful or glowing. Williams was obsessed with this technique where sprites would just cycle through every single color in the game's palette. Robotron is... wow. This is... wow, with the whole look of this game, you kind of expect that this must have been like the first game to use this technique. Like they just figure out that it was a thing that they can do, so they just went fucking insane on it. But no, this is way far off from being the first. So I guess they just thought that a bunch of glowing, flashing lights adorning every single sprite was futuristic. This will be gaming in 2084. And to be fair, the effect is really good. It's weird to think about, but the fact that most of the colors here are constantly fluctuating kind of messes with my mind. I can never pinpoint any of the characters to one specific color, so it kind of paints them in my mind as, like, glowing white? I don't really know how to describe it, but that's what I think. I love that on all the outside marketing material, they're showing the protagonist like this badass Mega Man Space Warrior guy. He's a genetic engineering error turned super mutant combat warrior. He'll wipe out all the Robotrons with his hyperkinetic blasts. Yeah, man, totally.
Members of the human family, hear me! The Robotrons are coming! Yes, the Robotrons are coming!
Really, I feel like Williams games have always had like really good sound design and atmospheres, which is kind of interesting because they reuse sound effects across a lot of their games. Joust and Robotron all share this boo sound, and all the individual samples that make up their other sound effects are reused in even more places. A lot of times when an arcade game has music or a lot of repeating noises, it can get extremely grating. If it's too quiet, it can get boring, but not only do Williams games utilize their sound effects really effectively, they're even able to instill a really strong atmosphere. Robotron does this thing that I've always loved in games where each level starts off with a really harsh, dramatic noise, almost telling you that you've already lost before the game has even begun. It's been done in like a lot more games than I really realized before I started making this video. I don't even know if there's a name for this trope, but there's something especially fucking masterful about how Williams did it. It's insane how they're able to create such wildly different atmospheres with such limited sound design. Robotron is like a busy downtown at night. I always imagine that this world is just so structurally fucked that these guys are just on their way to work on some Tuesday and need to hire a guy to shoot the robots littering the streets. I had not read the story recap. It feels harsh and dangerous, but manageable. Like, is the siren at the start signaling the arrival of the Robotrons, or is it signaling your arrival? The fact that pretty much the only sound you hear throughout each level is your lasers and footsteps kind of enhances this fact, but that same kind of fact makes its bleakness even more apparent. Like, you're in control, but you're in control of a situation you never should have been in the first place. And then you die because the 360th degree had not yet been invented. Bubbles is just like immediately so much more whimsical. Even if you close your eyes, there's immediately a difference in tone between the two games. There's still silence, but the sounds of lasers and footsteps are replaced with these goofy little bubble noises every time you absorb something from the sink. It's not immediately less intense than Robotron, it's just intense in a different way, like a Looney Tunes idea of tension. And to be honest, most of that is probably due to the reused sound effects between games. Bubble seems more intense as a result, Robotron feels more whimsical, they're infecting each other. Blaster has an extremely cool style to it, kind of like an evolution of what Robotron had introduced a year prior. I really like the weird rainbow flooring, and again, Williams shows off their cool-ass transitions with these vector graphic introduction screens, and again, Williams shows off the recycled sound effects with the blah 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 blah, making a return from Robotron, but this time in a really strange way, where it kind of trails off at the end. Like, it's not even letting you enjoy your small victory by transitioning the sound right back into the chaos of the gameplay. Blaster actually released in this fucking trash can of a cabinet called the Duramold that nobody bought because the plastic would shrink over time and destroy the components inside. It only released for 3 games. Bubbles, the only blue one, and dare I say the only one with a plastic design somewhat makes sense, Blaster, and Sinistar. The way Sinistar is able to instill dread into you is really weird, because at first glance it pretty much just seems like a fairly basic Asteroids type game, and for a while at least that's pretty much how it stays. It doesn't play its cards right away. Not even the opening demo really gives you a taste of what's going on here. All you know is that you need to mine crystals to defeat this thing, and if you run out, you need to run. There aren't that many enemies in the first level, and most of the ones that are there are just non-dangerous worker drones. It's very quiet, though you might occasionally hear an echoing clank. Even dying feels kind of underplayed, but it does reveal some urgency in your mission.
Where I live.
Time to run. Sinistar is a seemingly invincible, extremely fast, instant-killing planet-sized robot thing, and he's the coolest thing ever created. The way the game builds up the mystery of Sinistar as you play it for the first time is completely unmatched. Again, with the harsh noises and visuals signaling the beginning of the next phase of the game, and probably the best arcade game to ever do it. It really makes you feel the urgency of your situation, and then when Sinistar is finally completed, the loading screen just basically turns into a taunt. Like, yeah, the rest of your lives don't really matter if you haven't gotten enough bombs by this point, you're fucked. His voice is so scary, it's not even really the voice itself as it is the volume. This was literally the first ever game to have stereo sound, and one of the first games to have real voice voice-acted lines, and it's probably the best introduction of those two concepts into gaming as you could get. He's not just loud, you fucking feel the loudness in your bones. He literally sounds like an actual demon, it's insane. The cockpit unit is even worse. Apparently they even made a 3D PC sequel that's actually pretty cool looking. I think it's really interesting that they reinterpreted him into this weird tentacle beast, and the drones actually assemble the portal he appears from instead of the body itself. It seems very fun, however, I will use the fact that this video isn't about PC games as an excuse to not have to figure out how to get this thing working on my computer. Actually, before I move on, what does this voice sound like here? He's too polite. He's not threatening me. He's giving me a heads up. Thank you. No, thank you. While we're on the topic of hilariously toothless voice work, this is Pang 3, also known as Buster Brothers 3, also known as Buster Buddies. Buster Brothers has always felt to me like one of those games that was fun, but just boring enough to spark various Flash ripoffs over the years, though I think that's more guilt by association because the developers also made Puzzloop, aka Zuma minus Frog. Mitchell is basically just Japanese PopCap, honestly. Thank you! No thank you. Buster Brothers is really fun though, I really wasn't expecting that. There's a lot more depth in the gameplay than I thought there'd be, like ladders and bricks and stuff that you can platform on. It's really good. It's not very weird though. The concept is relatively grounded, all things considered. Balloons are taking over the world, landmarks, so you need to travel the globe with your Buster Brother to pomp them. I said relatively. Pang 3, on the other hand, feels a lot stranger in its concept. You're in a private art gallery, and in order to get back to paintings on display, you need to go inside them with your Buster Buddy to pomp the balloons. I realize saying this out loud that this actually sounds a lot less strange than the first game. Well, there's that, and there's a shift in art styles from brother to buddy. Pang 1 is that iconic CPS1 crunchy green tint to everything. The brothers specifically are very Street Fighter 2 feeling. This looks like if an Osamu Sato game went sober. This game just has the most hilarious first impression. First, I love how every time you put in a coin it goes, thank you, like hilariously quick, thank you, move on, play the game now. Then there's the characters. Don Tacos, the most wanted. Captain Hog, the greatest pirate. Sheila the Thief, the queen of the thieves. Pink Leopard, Mr. Dandy Lightfingers. Huh? Wait, what? Why are they all criminals? Are they stealing the paintings? Is the Pomping Fun just a minigame that they play in their minds as they rob an art gallery a la Danganronpa? I don't know, I'm gonna be the cat. All the characters in this game are pre-rendered with crusty 90s 3D, so they come off as weird-looking puppets, a style I find very, very charming. I love their little dances at the end of each level too, they're so goofy. I think it's funny that all the characters are pretty explicitly described as thieves, except for Don Tacos, who is just the most wanted. Yeah, I'm sure he is. Then the first level of each of the modes just so happens to choose the funniest art pieces to use for the backgrounds. In practice mode, it's just two giant topless statues in a sunset void. The backgrounds for the art pieces that don't fit the full screen are so funny, because they usually just end up duplicating them and layering them over a really surreal background. The final level of the practice stages is just two Mona Lisas staring into a sea of Vitruvian men. The first level of the main campaign is this. I cannot say the name of this painting. Since this is the first level, this is before the premise of collecting pieces for an art gallery has been introduced, so if you don't already know that this is a famous painting, like I didn't, it's like, whoa, okay, slow down, what is happening back there? Pang 3 is super good though. It takes all the obstacles that Buster Brothers had and right off the bat cranks it up to the max. Tons of ladders and walls and fucking teleporters. It's fun and hectic, especially with a Buster Buddy. Friend. I said friend. I meant friend. Mighty Pang is pretty good also, like genuinely some of the best pixel graphics I've ever seen, not just in an arcade game, but probably ever, honestly. I like the little pinball life counter where you see a new Buster Brother reloaded into the chamber every time you die. The whole UI is just so nice looking. It's like a digital extension of the cabinet itself. This whole sleek aesthetic, straight black and white, vivid candy-like colors emphasizing important details. I feel like it's sort of a trademark of late 90s, early 2000s games. It makes sense, I guess, because that would be around the time that candy cabinets would have become really ingrained as a staple in arcades in Japan. I'm pretty sure that Buster is actually also pre-rendered 3D, albeit much less off-looking than 3, which may or may not be a good thing depending on how you look at it. I will say, it feels a lot more safe than 3 in general, actually. It ditches the Buster Buddies in favor of the Buster Brothers, which I suppose makes sense, although it is a little sad, and it ditches the weird art void in favor of the Pomping World Tour from 1, but hey, it's still fun, just as, if not more fun, arguably. But I don't think anything will ever be able to beat the wholehearted weird-assery that 3 had. That just deepened the more games I played for this video. I played a lot of games where the whole gimmick is essentially just famous genre but wacky, and this isn't a dig at those games, but they all follow a pretty similar general formula, one that's pretty easy to spot when you see it, one that doesn't really show up in Ping, strangely. It's very confident in its own brand of odd, and I really commend it for that. Now, this game might have been pretty out there, but I think I know of a game that might just be even more bizarre. That's right, say hello to Ninja Baseball Batman. Ninja Baseball Batman is a game that sticks somewhat closer to that typical Japanese weird game formula, with a twist. Baseball. I know basically nothing about baseball. I have been to 2 baseball games and I remember nothing about either because I have no idea what the game is about and I was too busy eating Cracker Jacks. Did you know that they don't even put prizes in the Cracker Jacks anymore? It's just a QR code to a poorly developed app. I don't think I like baseball that much, but you know what I do like? Ninja Baseball Batman. Ninja Baseball Batman follows the adventures of Ninja Baseball Batman. That's the name of the team, as under orders from the Commissioner of Baseball, they recover the stolen artifacts of the Baseball Hall of Fame from a mysterious evildoer lurking in the shadows. Ooh. The only beat-em-ups I've ever really gotten into are Castle Crashers and Streets of Rage. Streets of Rage has a second attack button for using special moves, and Castle Crashers uses like every button on the Xbox controller, so it was a little weird for me to get used to a beat-em-up with only 2 buttons, but I feel like it utilizes them really well. I never really liked the repetitiveness of some beat-em-ups. Sometimes it feels like all you're doing is spamming A and running occasionally, but I really like the way NBBM, Ninja Baseball Batman, sort of incorporates fighting game mechanics into the moveset. Very simple motion inputs make all the attacks flow super well into each other. It has this thing that I really like where you can hold down the attack button and then press the jump button to do a special attack. It just feels really good to play. There isn't a super gauge or anything, so anytime you want to do a super attack, you actually have to expend a portion of your health, which is a really interesting trade-off. I liked losing a chunk of my health in exchange for just getting to home run a clump of enemies off the screen. I feel like an irresponsible god. My favorite level is probably Texas, which has basically everything pointing to it just being a boring desert level with like cow baseballs, but no, it's the ghost level. You start out in an abandoned western ghost town with zombie baseballs rising from their graves, and a poltergeist pulls you into its mansion and forces you through waves and waves of enemies while it throws stuff at you from the background. The animations are all really good. I love the dripping on the zombie baseballs. They have this really pretty green and purple palette to them that I really like. There's these ghost burgers that you have to knock the eyes off of so you can eat them. It's just so much fun. Every single second of gameplay feels like they're introducing so many new and interesting ideas. It just doesn't let up. I haven't even talked about the music yet. It's like these really great twangy, sample-heavy, sort of Genesis-y sounding hip-hoppy tracks. It's not anything revolutionary, but it's fun and it fits the gameplay well. The boss of this level is this bowl made up of all of the objects you had thrown at you throughout the level. It's super creatively designed and satisfying to fight. I don't know, man. This game is just so relentlessly charming, it's hard to wrap my head around it. Pretty early into the Florida level, you start seeing these little guys pulling carts with Tanuki statues on them, and well, at first it seems like a pretty innocuous if odd detail. You enter this factory area a little later on, and you can actually see the Tanuki being converted into the enemies that you've been fighting the whole game. It's such a funny detail to me, even besides the fact that it basically reveals all the enemies are robots. This game has some really cool robots in it, actually. There's this guy that's just a stick figure made of baseballs, which might as well just be a staple of mid-90s games, but I really like that there's these little openings in the top of his balls that shoot up metal slug explosions. It's actually kind of a rare attack to see, probably just because I kept getting hit by his punch, so he had no reason to do anything but just keep punching. I like the casino robot in the Vegas level. It kind of reminds me of Nightmare from Metroid Fusion, even down to the fact that its armor deteriorates over the course of the battle. I'm just a sucker for casino-themed bosses in general. Thanks, Sonic. The Florida boss is a robot alligator in a lab coat. He just looks so cool. I love his weird little turtle shell on his back and his gauntlets. This specific way of shading metallic orange that you see a lot in 90s games is really cool looking too. Thanks, Sonic 3. Halfway through the fight, you cut his tail off and it starts flopping around the arena as another obstacle, and then when you finally defeat him, he turns into a handbag. It's so needlessly brutal. Pretty much for the whole game, I had just assumed that NBBM were robots, like Mega Man style robots with their big eyes and hands. You never see their faces, so I just kind of assumed that those were their faces. As it turns out though, they weren't even designed in Japan, but instead by IREM America's national sales manager, Drew Maniscalco, and were based on Batman and the Ninja Turtles. I'm pretty sure that the more robot-y elements of their appearance in-game more so came from the Japanese art team's sensibilities, being combined with a more American idea of what a ninja looks like. It's kind of weird to think about, but you never really see this kind of of ninja in Japanese media. You never really see them depicted with full masks, and when they do, they have these exaggerated ear flaps at the top. The NBBM ninjas pull a lot more from Western depictions of ninjas, where I feel like being able to see a ninja's eyes is a lot less common. Like, the original versions of the Ninja Turtles showed them with blank white eyes, Batman is shown with that. You can kind of see that in the comic that was made of NBBM in 2014 by an American artist and under more direct control of Maniscalco, where Jose's eyes are a lot smaller and sharper. The more tokusatsu-y elements of the in-game sprites are grounded a little more. Like, the original game depicted their outfits kind of shiny looking, either plastic armor or just shiny cloth. They looked like Power Rangers, basically. But the comic shows the outfit as basically just a normal baseball uniform with a mask. The comic also doesn't hold off in showing Jose's face. In fact, his mask is off for more pages than it's on. It's basically an origin story for NBBM, where Jose is a washed-up baseball star who meets a Japanese monk who teaches him martial arts and tells him to do away with evil. Just in general. It's a take on these characters that I'm not a huge fan of, both in trying to rationalize the insanity of the game by explaining its origins and in art, but it's still fun. I like the way the Bat Boys are drawn here. In-game, the joke of them is that they're alive, but they're still shaped exactly like a normal baseball bat, so they just kind of skitter along the ground with a frozen expression. In the comic, they're insane. They're insane. I love it. I always think it's really interesting and funny seeing another country's interpretations of America in media, and since this game is like a tour of the country filtered through the eyes of a guy obsessed with baseball, filtered through the eyes of a Japanese art team, I was extremely excited to see what it did with its concept, and I was not let down. So, the Flatwoods Monster makes an appearance with a design I actually really like, very candy-coated. I'd eat this guy if I could. Here's the twist. In Las Vegas. I'm not going to say that it doesn't fit the vibe of the level, because that would be a lie, and lying is a sin. It's just kind of funny that a game about traveling to different US cities would feature a character named after a US city outside of its city. It's like seeing the Statue of Liberty in Wisconsin. It's more of a funny detail, though, than like an actual cultural interpretation. It's a former Chicago, and it really tickled me that the enemies in the Chicago level were all dogs with guns, because of all the crime. Dynamite Ducks shares a lot of similar ideas with NBBM, strangely enough, though the way it actually carries them out is a lot stranger in a way that I'm not fully convinced was intentional. A lot of you probably know this game from a strange green fusion of the ducks that appears in Sonic the Fighters and sort of in Mania. I know that's where I learned about this game from, at least. I was kind of surprised when I learned how strange the game was, though. Like, this is the game Sega keeps referencing. I think it makes a little more sense when you consider the background, though. It was the 7th game that Sega AM2 had developed, and they've always been pretty self-referential. You can literally just play a bunch of their old arcade games in Shenmue and later in Yakuza. Sonic the Fighters already references Fighting Vipers with Candy the Cat. Fighters Megamix exists, so it makes sense. You're developing a cartoon animal game, you need another character. It just so happens that one of your Legendary Studios' earliest games was also about cartoon animals. Boom. Bean. The game starts off right in front of a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Sorry, Friend Chicken. What a great first impression. I can't think of a funnier way to start off a game than that. Dynamite Ducks' whole gimmick is basically that there's just a bunch of weapons everywhere. Not like iron pipes or baseball bats, but like guns, bombs, rocket launchers. No dynamite though. But until then, you'll be forced to rely on your small one-button moveset, which is pretty limited compared to other beat-em-ups. There isn't even any grabs, because the enemies can't guard or anything. But you can wind up your punches, which just feels great to pull off each time. The fact that the animation is so limited strangely gives such a huge punch to each attack. Like, seeing them snap in a single frame to a ridiculously exaggerated death animation just feels super great, especially when you catch a whole bunch of them in a wind-up punch. The guns are okay. It's not even that they feel especially bad or anything. They're actually pretty good, in fact. They're super satisfying to use, just getting to mow down whole groups of enemies, but you also drop them when you get hit, which is fine until you start getting shot at yourself, because this is probably just a me problem. I find gauging depth to be extremely difficult in 2D beat-em-ups, especially for projectiles, so I never really got to try those ones out in a full capacity. This game is really rough looking. I like the way it looks, but like, it's rough. Bin and Pin are completely non-emotive, the backgrounds are just in a totally different, less interesting art style than the rest of the game, so would you believe me if I told you that this game actually came out a little after Altered Beast, and on the same hardware too, to add insult to injury? It's not really relevant to anything else I had to say, I just thought it was funny. So the thing that made me draw comparisons to NBBM, besides like the enemy animations, which is pretty obvious, is the levels. The first half of the game is pretty normal for this kind of game. It's a downtown level, Japan, jungle, they're just running down the list of famous cartoony set pieces they can pull tropes from. It's weird, but it's calculated. Then the next level is Chicago, which, well, I mean, it seems like we're treading over some similar ground here, but okay. This also happens to be the first level that reuses a boss from one of the older levels, the Fire Boss, because Chicago burned down that one. And the next level is Texas. I guess we're just going on a tour of the USA now. Hey, my favorite state. I had a lot more fun with Dynamite Ducks than I was expecting to, honestly. I really wasn't expecting it to be anything special, but it was really good, even though it kind of feels like it ran out of steam a bit at the end. I'm sort of convinced that the team might have ran out of budget or time or something, because the last half is just so much less coherent than the first. The final boss is just this older boss, except with a weirder weak point. Oh my god. Sega licensed out the publishing rights to Activision, so there are actually some British developed PC ports of Ducks, which I have not played because I don't want to learn how to set up an Amiga emulator. However, that version in particular does actually have one thing that the other versions don't, and chances are it's probably the only other reason you know what this game is. British smut. Some of the PC versions of the game feature a very well-hidden Easter egg where you have to edit a line in the hex editor to say dirty, changing the original intro into a dirty version where Lucy becomes neon orange and the evil guy is pretty much just the same. The narration is so funny, not really because of how offensive it is, but just because it's really funny hearing how a jaded, probably horrifically overworked British computer programmer in the late 80s describes sex acts. One day, Lucy was playing with herself and, well, Ben and Bin were buggering each other in the beautiful flower garden. Let's move on. I've been working my way through another Score Attack game recently, Mikey, which along with being really fun, just has a really funny setup. You play as Mikey, who needs to escape from an American high school by collecting hearts from different rooms that make up a love letter, and then meeting up with your girlfriend at the entrance to the school. You collect hearts by headbutting glass jars until they break and shoving other kids out of their seats. The whole school is in love with Mikey. The Japanese version is called Shinyushin Torukun, or New Employee Torukun, where the setting is replaced with an office building to avoid controversy about school violence. The game is extremely American, by which I mean your life counter is American flags and the soundtrack is comprised of Beatles songs, the famous American band The Beatles. Mikey is interesting because it's sort of a mix of Score Attack and adventure. There are no continues and the game loops infinitely, but it also has a bunch of different levels where the gameplay is slightly different between them, and it even has an ending, although I admit I haven't gotten very far in the game yet, at least without save states. The main hazard of the game is the teachers and staff chasing you throughout the rooms. If they catch you, you lose a life and your progress for that room is reset. We have three main ways of dealing with them. One, you can headbutt them, which requires good timing and positioning and knocks them out for a couple seconds. When they get back up, they'll be faster than before. Two, in the second and third levels, you can find objects that you can throw at the enemies, which doesn't make the enemies faster and doesn't take as much timing as headbutting, but there are only 3 objects per container, so you don't want to go overboard on them. 3, and this is only in the third level, you can just sit there and the teacher will go back to the front of the class. This is only really useful occasionally, since most of the hearts in the first level are also by the front, but it can be handy. Every couple of seconds, this glow will appear on a different heart, and if you collect the heart while the glow is around it, you get bonus points, which is easier said than done. The glow moves very quickly, and often when it appears, you won't have enough time to maneuver over to it and do whatever step you need to take to access the heart in that level, so it's good to try to remember the pattern that the glow follows and try to create a path for yourself that allows for you to get all the glowing hearts within a couple rotations. If you get all the glowing hearts, you get a perfect bonus, but the game becomes a lot easier if you just ignore the glow altogether and collect the hearts as you pass them. The first level is probably my favorite just because the gameplay in it is so unique compared to other games. In this one, the hearts are underneath the students' chairs, so you need to push them off them by standing next to them and wiggling the stick towards them. When you do so, however, the student will be knocked out into the last chair that you sat in, and you can't push them once they're knocked out, so if you change your mind about what heart you want to get, usually if you're trying to get glowing hearts and the seat has already been opened up, you've pretty much blocked off that heart for yourself until you die, or if you're able to avoid the teacher for an extremely long time. There's only one enemy, but he's pretty fast, and as I said before, his default location is right near where most of the hearts are, so it's a big challenge trying to get the students out of their seats without being caught, and especially because if you stop pushing the student halfway through, they'll push you, often right into the teacher's grasp. In between levels are these hallway segments where you're chased by the teacher and the janitor, and if you're not aiming for a high score, you can pretty much just breeze past these parts, but if you are, you can find tons of bonus points with these toolboxes in this lady in one of these windowless rooms. Sometimes the lady has a boxing glove though, and I'm pretty sure it's random whether or not you get punched or if it's the lady, so it's kind of risk-reward, I guess. The dance class level is great because all the normal obstacles have been replaced by moving dancers that stun you if you touch them, allowing for the teacher to sneak up behind you, which is also pretty likely to happen anyway with so many moving characters on screen at once. I'm not great at Mikey yet, I haven't gotten past the second level without save states, but I'm definitely going to be returning to it once this video is done. It's a little strange that people don't talk about this game more, with it being a pretty early Konami game, and a pretty good one at that, though I suppose being so early in a pretty universally despised company's life, a company that literally ruined their reputation with their arcade-adjacent business ventures, is probably exactly the reason why it's not talked about very often. But hey, while we're on the topic of Konami games, I finished Silent Hill 2 for the first time while I was making this video. The original, the remake wasn't out yet, and Jesus, that game was fucking incredible. It just might be my second favorite 2001 video game with clunky shooting mechanics about a mysterious woman named Maria, and that is saying something. I wasn't planning on making a video about it, in fact I still don't plan to, but playing it did remind me, oh yeah, I'm making a video about arcade games. There's an arcade game. Let me tell you, this game was a pain to get working on my computer. Pretty much every other game I played for this video I just emulated through Final Burn Neo, but it was not so easy for Silent Hill, because unlike all the other older arcade games I was playing for this video, it's actually PC-based, meaning that it runs off of an exe file. So does that mean I can just run it natively on my computer? No. Fortunately, I do have options. Number 1, the Collection Chamber has a native PC port for Windows 10. I have Windows 11, but it did actually run properly on my computer for a bit. Number 2, JKonfig. There's actually a YouTube tutorial for getting this running, specifically with Silent Hill 2, that explains nothing and links no resources that help with getting it working with the game. The copy I downloaded actually already had JKonfig pre-installed into it though. I didn't even have to configure the keybinds, which really threw me off actually. And it crashed again. 3, Technoparrot. Dude, this is one of the ugliest UIs I've ever used, sorry. I didn't even notice the button to link the file path for the game at first because it just looks like blank space. When you add a game to your library, you have to scroll down this huge list of every single game that the emulator supports, really like the mental image of a guy who can't afford Guilty Gear Strive, so he pirates and emulates specifically the Japan-only arcade version. One thing that Technoparrot does have, though, is a website where you can download a video codec that stops the game from crashing in the place it does every time, so thanks, Technoparrot, you're good for something after all. Silent Hill the Arcade is a light gun game, which seems like a pretty obvious genre to go with, especially when trying to translate a horror game into an arcade experience, but for Silent Hill specifically, it seems like such a funny choice for a genre characterized by over-the-top action set pieces, but oddly enough, I feel like it translates Silent Hill's brand of slow burn atmospheric horror to a light gun game pretty well. The walks between set pieces are a little longer than usual for a rail shooter, making them feel more tense and oppressive, a lot of which is also probably owed to the excellent music and sound design. The locations, music, and enemies are all reused from older Silent Hill games, particularly 2, 3, and 4, but recontextualized to fit the weird new plot they created for this game. The story follows Eric, Tina, and a colorful cast of wacky friends as they explore the horrors of Silent Hill and a search for answers about the missing little Baroness and trying not to let Emily get killed by monsters. The story is really strange to me, not really because it's all that different than a normal Silent Hill plot, but more so that it isn't. It's just as metaphorical and surreal as any of the other games, but presented through an hour-long rail shooter, and again, I have to say, it translates pretty well. Silent Hill 2 sort of feels like drifting through a bad dream. All the characters are strangely sickly looking, they all speak really unnaturally, you're left to sit with nothing but your thoughts and the sounds of the atmosphere, and it all just kinda stops. It's no wonder that the theories about this game went so crazy, because just like a bad dream, the game leaves you with a lot of hazy details to speculate about. Shit just kind of stops making sense about halfway through, not even an understanding of what's happening or character motivations or plot, but the constant fucking weirdness kind of starts to melt together so perfectly that by the last hour of the game I was basically just sitting with a blankly morose expression on my face as I continued to drift through the fog. It's kind of like a rail shooter in that way. I'm only about halfway through Silent Hill 3 right now at the time of writing the script, and so far it seems like it's sort of done away with that in favor of a slightly more straightforward story, which is also really cool, but it's definitely a much different vibe. Silent Hill the Arcade feels a lot more like 2 in that way. The plot is kind of confusing, but it's not nonsensical, you can follow it pretty well. There are a couple things that seem like they came out of nowhere, but had technically already been explained in the opening demo that I would have watched like almost an hour before that point, but it never really hampered my understanding of what was happening. It just made me a little confused as to why the dad character hadn't shown up in the game itself until the game was almost over. If you played Silent Hill 2, you might recognize the little Baroness from a pretty insignificant memo in Toluca Prison, insignificant enough that I don't even remember if I found it or not during my playthrough. It's a really cool idea to expand on the lore that 2 had introduced, and I think the way the arcade does it is really well executed. The voice acting has that classic Silent Hill everyone says it's bad, but it's only really bad if you're playing this game expecting and wanting bad voice acting twang to it, albeit a little closer towards the voice acting just actually being kind of bad, but it's in a fun way.
George. Eric! George? Oh boy, I thought I was gonna die. Can you get up? Of course. If you'd lend me a hand. Come on.
All the actors ham up their lines in really fun ways. I feel some of these lines at a really deep level. Eric is the scared dumbass. He doesn't even sound like he wants to be here. Tina is just as scared, but she's also fucking angry. She does action hero quips, but delivers them with enough unconfidence that they just kind of come off as general observations, with Eric following behind with a, yeah, you're right.
I have never been to a shopping mall that I've wanted to leave so quickly.
Yeah, really.
I really like these two by the end of the game. They're not as deep or interesting as James or Heather, but they're fun. I'm mostly just surprised that they even kept up a consistent personality between these two. They had every excuse in the world not to even try with this game. I do think it's a little odd, however, how heavily censored it is. I'd suppose that since this game would be played in public, behind a curtain, but still in public, they felt like they needed to tone down some of the more violent aspects of the game. Something I've always thought was pretty cool about Silent Hill monsters is that, despite how strange and incomprehensible they all bleed red blood, as if to ground them to our plane of existence. In the arcade, they all have inky black blood, which they also melt into when they die. It's definitely a lot less interesting, but in a game like this, I think it makes sense that they go for the more immediately spooky and mysterious style. This extends to the monster designs themselves, too. The first monsters you encounter in the game, the double heads, are more like single heads in this game, because there's only one. The face that's usually really heavily burned is just completely normal, so I don't even know if these are meant to be monsters as much as they are just normal rabid dogs that wandered into Silent Hill by mistake. The gum heads no longer have gum heads either, they're basically just Slenderman now, as opposed to looking like a fucked up zombie made out of a rotten eraser. They're super funny looking in this game, but the new type looks pretty cool, if also slightly lame compared to 4's version. The nurses are specifically 3's version, but with bandages over their faces is to not make the horror game too scary. Good news, fandom user Alex Shepard, the numb bodies have their foreskin back. This all pales in comparison, however, to the funniest change of them all. I thought at first that Pyramid Head was using his movie design, where he's shirtless with a long flesh skirt, but I realized right around this point, I think, that no, he was using his design from the games. It's just that they had removed all of the blood and rust from his outfit and covered it with a plain white tank top. It's so deeply and profoundly non-scary. These designs were not meant to be seen this visibly, this close up, and with all the guts and grime scrunched off of them. It's kinda disappointing, because I was really looking forward to seeing some of these monsters modeled and animated with more detail, even if I've played a little more into the cartoonishness, but it never really gets scary enough for me to enjoy it as a genuine piece of horror, it never gets cool enough for me to enjoy it as an RE4 kind of deal, and it never got funny enough for me to enjoy it on a campy level. I do like when the monsters dissolve after a couple seconds on death. They let out a little screech, so you're just constantly hearing these obnoxious squealing noises from off screen. I love the amusement part. The animation of Hannah transforming into the Phantom is really, really cool looking. It's like it's breaking through a film or something. The water effects are crazy impressive and super satisfying to look at. The animations on the monster are great. Just in general, I really wish that the game played more into its own strengths. The game is about a boat. It would have been more interesting to see a more nautical theme crop up a little more other than a single otherworld shift in a boss fight. The game does this foghorn sound whenever the dimension shifts, which is really cool at first, but sometimes it cuts off dialogue in really funny ways that just makes it sound like an extremely bass-boosted fart noise.
What do you think that means?
Yeah, I don't understand.
Same with the radio dialogue of the final level. It's so blown out that every line has a hilarious energy to it that's hard to explain. The gameplay is surprisingly pretty fun. I've never really dipped my toes into light gun games beyond that Terminator game that's at every arcade for some reason, but I see why people go crazy over these. I really liked playing it, even if it was just a mouse and not a gun like what was intended. Usually when I play light gun games, which again is not that often, I just kind of blast away without really paying attention to anything, but the combo system here gave me a good encouragement to make sure each shot really counted. At first I thought it was kind of funny that you could rack up such a big combo just by shooting corpses, but it's a really good risk-reward mechanic. You could keep shooting this insane cancer, but the camera could start moving again, you could lose it all. Do you dare? Hi there. I also really like the way that the game interprets traditional survival horror mechanics, though I honestly would have preferred if they went a little farther with it. There are 2 times in the game where you get to a fork in the road and are able to choose a path to go down, though kind of annoyingly there's always a pretty obvious right and wrong answer to these. In the first level, one path gives you a shotgun that's super fun and satisfying to use, along with some new enemies and cool set pieces, but the other path is just like a hallway. A bit later into the Toluca prison level, there's actually 3 options to choose, 2 doors and a hallway. One of the doors is locked, but the other one leads to a rusty key that you can use to unlock it, and the hallway leads you to an isolation chamber where you can get a rifle from a dead guy, which is a slightly less satisfying weapon than the shotgun in that it might as well just be the pistol with less bullets. Like, it's no Killer 7, hell, it's not even a House of the Dead 1, but it's nice to spice it up a bit with some changes every now and then. It gives me a reason to go back to it, which Konami clearly wanted you to do with the implementation of the E-Amusement Pass, which to my understanding is a way to save your progress in the game, allowing for a new Game Plus run once you've completed it, and allowing for you to unlock the game's UFO ending.
Great-grandpa?
Isn't it cool, Eric? This is my new ship.
And you were alive?
I wasn't able to do any of these things since I was emulating it, but it seems fun in theory. Hey, is that Hit Shmup Gradius? You know what that means. It's time to shmup. Cotton stars Cotton, a witch who's been sent on a journey to defeat the evil Mist by her fairy companion Silk, not to rescue the world from the clutches of darkness, but to collect the 7 willows. What are willows? Candy, I think? The gap in tone between the cutscenes and the main gameplay is so immediately hilarious to me. The title demo shows a level set against a gorgeous night backdrop as strange creatures dance through the sky and Cotton floats along on her broom, and then in the cutscene she's just this goblin that can barely put together a sentence because she's too busy thinking about willows. This game has some really good art in it, kind of PC98 feeling, probably just because those are some of the only other games around this time to use anime-styled sprites so significantly. The in-game art is just as appealing. The backgrounds are really nice and detailed, the colors are really moody in a way that I find really appealing. It's not a Sega game, but it was developed on the Sega System 16, so a lot of the quirks of Sega games from around this time are present here. The enemies here are all generic fantasy creatures, but they all have little twists to how they work or how they appear in-game that makes them all really memorable. The dwarves start out as just another generic enemy, but they start appearing more and more until it's revealed at the end of the 4th level that they're being mass-produced out of the Sphinx's forehead. I really like this golem that appears a couple of times. When you first encounter him, he's super intimidating, and you might not even end up killing him before he flies away. But once you figure out the trick to him, he's kind of a comfort to know that you can just take a little break from the enemies for a little bit. Also, I like that there's meat in his face. You can improve any automaton exponentially by giving it meat. Cotton is a horizontally oriented shmup, one that also scrolls vertically, which from what I've played wasn't very typical for the genre until Cotton came around. The game starts off only scrolling sideways, but then it sort of fakes you out by beginning to move upward. You pass this very haunted looking mansion on the way up that you interestingly never go inside or even interact with much at all. I never even noticed until maybe my 50th playthrough that there's a clock in it, because I was always so focused on beating the golem to death to notice. Same with this portal thing at the end of the level. I also never noticed that the second level actually starts exactly where the first level starts, except way zoomed into the other side of the lake. Maybe that's why the portal is there. The game uses a magic system, which functions as Cotton's expendable weapons. Fire magic shoots a dragon of fire straight forward, which is good for clearing a row of enemies quickly. Thunder magic shoots out a long-lasting stream of thunder in front of you, pretty indisputably the better option, to the point that it kind of makes you wonder why the fire magic is there in the first place. Sort of like Twinbee, the main collectibles of this game, in this case crystals, can be juggled upward, each time changing their color and therefore their properties. Red crystals give you 1 fire magic, blues 1 thunder, yellows give you some XP, oranges give you more XP, and after cycling through all of them, the crystal breaks. And yes, this game has an RPG-style leveling system. Every time you kill an enemy or get a crystal, your EXP increases slightly. What does EXP stand for, you ask? Experience points. The bar starts off pretty small at first, but it gets larger and harder to fill the longer it goes on, but every time you fill a bar, your LV increases and your basic bullets become larger and more powerful. What's LV stand for, you ask? Level. You can also upgrade your bomb to be faster and travel along the ground by collecting these things. I think the bomb does more damage than the normal bullets, but after a while of playing it, I kind of realized that it's more worth it to just do consistent damage with the bullets with how slow the bombs are. Every time you die, your level is cut in half and you lose all of your bomb upgrades, which is pretty damaging later on in the game where you can be dumped right back in the middle of a swarm of enemies with really weak bullets, but it does feel really satisfying to get good enough at a level to go through it all with no damage taken. The second level was super hard when I first played it. it, so it was really satisfying getting good enough at it to not just get to the boss without getting hit, but kill the boss without getting hit. And the way the game uses the fact that you'll be replaying it a bunch to switch up the gameplay in subsequent attempts are really interesting. There's a mini-boss that's this evil tree, but what's really cool about it is that the next segment of the level actually changes depending on how you did in the fight. If you got enough hits on him in time, he explodes, and the next segment takes place on top of his dead branches with these really dangerous archer enemies perched on top. If you didn't kill him in time, he goes back to sleep and the level continues on top of his head like normal, except now the archers are able to hide inside of his leaves, which on one hand makes them attack less often, or at the very least makes their patterns a little more predictable, but it also makes them only able to be killed while they're out, so it's an interesting decision you have to make. I find the section easier with the leaves, but I find waiting around during the mini-boss boring, so I usually go for the dead branches path. Sometimes in a level you find these weird Buddha heads, and if you shoot them they'll fly off screen for a second and return holding something. If you keep shooting them though, they'll just freeze there and let you get killed by them if you don't notice them quick enough to stop. That killed me more often than I like to admit. The Buddha could just be holding a powerful crystal or bomb upgrade, but usually they'll be carrying a fairy. The fairies are your options in this game. They follow behind you and shoot as you shoot, and can't be damaged by enemies, but their bullets don't scale as yours do as they would in other shmups, so they stay pretty weak throughout the game. Until you discover their true purpose. Whenever a fairy touches an enemy, or if you hold down the bomb button to fire them, the fairy will latch onto the enemy and deal damage, usually enough to kill them in a couple seconds, but typically even fewer if you're shooting at them too. It's hard to ingrain into your muscle memory at first, but it becomes an incredibly useful tool, especially later on. Additionally, holding down both the magic and bomb buttons will create a tandem magic attack. Fire will light all of your fairies on fire and home them in on enemies, killing them all in seconds. Very useful for later in the game where there are a bunch of enemies with high health or confusing bullet patterns that you don't feel confident in dealing with. Thunder makes the fairies create a barrier around you that lets you absorb hits. I think the more fairies you have, the longer it lasts, but I'm not sure because I never got the chance to use it that often. Early in the game I would use up all of my thunders on swarms of weak enemies that I didn't want to bother with, and later in the game I never had enough time to focus on what spells I was collecting. Whenever you die, one of your fairies explodes, dealing damage to everything on screen, including your crystals. You'll always have Silk by your side though, so you'll never be in a situation without a fairy, although only one fairy isn't the most useful thing in the world. Cotton finally gets all the 7 willows back at the end of the game, only to learn that the willows don't actually turn into a giant willow when combined, but instead bring back to life and color to the fairy world. Oh no! It has a really cute ending where Silk sends Cotton off on another wild goose chase to find a golden willow, starting them off on another crazy adventure. I'm really excited to play through the rest of the Cotton series once I'm done with this video. They remade the first game a couple years ago for modern consoles, and are still making new games and porting older ones as of a couple months ago. I'm really looking forward to seeing what's next for the franchise. Well, we have one more game to talk about today, one that wasn't as lucky as Cotton to still be getting new entries to this day, or even back when it was still new. That's right, it's time to talk about... Hey, now that I think about it, we never actually got around to solving Altered Beast Continues issue, did we? Red Earth, also known as Warzerd in Japan, which I constantly fluctuate between thinking sounds dumb and cool as hell, is a fighting game developed for the CPS-3 by Capcom and released in 1996, where it became semi-popular for a bit in Japan and really obscure and rare in North America, and never received a home console release for either region until 2022, where it is included as a bonus in the Vampire Savior port. What sets Red Earth apart from other fighting games, and what made me want to play it for this video, is the interesting ways it breaks conventions for fighting games, and introduces a lot of interesting concepts that haven't really been followed up on by another game since. Red Earth only has 4 characters, which is probably the fewest I've ever seen in a fighting game, apart from like Street Fighter 1, and it might seem kind of dumb to do that when one of the whole appeals of fighting games is a large cast of characters that you can sort through and attach yourself to one, and especially when this was the headlining game for the CPS-3 system, and it would be followed by Street Fighter 3, which similarly took an extremely ballsy approach to how it handled its roster by not including any older characters apart from Ryu and Ken. I think Capcom might have been getting a little too big ahead, but that did give us a lot of really cool experimentation from them in that generation. Red Earth isn't really as much about fighting head-to-head as it is about the single-player mode, though there is a 2-player mode that I didn't play and is probably fine. The game's story slightly differs between versions, not in any significant way as far as I'm aware, but there is one pretty glaring change between the English and Japanese versions that kind of recontextualizes the whole setting. Red Earth takes place in a fantasy world where monsters have begun appearing in various continents around the world after an evil wizard begins disrupting the balance of the universe. You fight dinosaurs and demons and play as magic-wielding warriors, Warzerds if you you will, that fight back against the evil while also working to solve their own issues. In Red Earth, the game takes place in the year of our Lord 13XX, which is around when the real-life Middle Ages were. In Warzerd, the game takes place in 1999, which, according to Wikipedia, is in a post-apocalypse. I can't read Japanese, so I'll take their word for it. I think it's kind of funny how much just changing the year this game is supposed to take place changes it. I'm instantly so much more interested in this plot than I was with the same plot when it was just presented as a magical medieval world. But Red! The 4 playable characters are Tessa or Tabasa, a magician, Leo, a king cursed to look like a lion, Mai Ling or Tao, a martial artist, and Kenji or Makuro, a cool ninja guy. The character I played the most was Tessa. She's a zoner whose strategy basically just consists of knocking over the enemy and dropping a wrecking ball on them. Her kicks are her transforming her shoe into one of 2 different cats. Her design is also super fun. I love her gigantic pants and her bony fingers that she uses to strike weird hand gestures at you. I also like playing as Kenji. It's super fun slashing and dashing through the enemy and then slamming them down with his huge gun. He's the only character in the game that can do this. This game has super cool fatalities. Since all the enemies you fight are big monsters, they give you an interesting look at the anatomy and what the artists were thinking when they were making them. I like the detail that Blade's heart is replaced with a crystal in his chest, and I especially like that they kept the splashing effect when Kenji crushes it. It's a soul gusher. Lavia doesn't have organs, just it's void of light, because the Lavia you fight is just a monstrous prison for her true form. Hydron has really funny voice lines and animations. When it wins a match, the little squid kids from one of its attacks come out and hip hip hooray. It's really cute. It also has probably my favorite gore sprite. I love how colorful and gross it is. I can't really describe why beyond that though. There are 8, technically 9 bosses in the game, and the order you fight the first 5 bosses in is different depending on the character and their stories. I think it's interesting seeing how the bosses that didn't really do anything in some characters' routes with locations that seemed kind of arbitrary are given a lot more importance and weight in other characters' routes. Congo is basically just filler between more important fights in Tessa's route. The fact that there's a burning village in the background is pretty much just set dressing, even in Leo's route where Congo is slightly more important to the story. In Mai Ling's route, you help reconnect a family who's been separated by Congo's destruction of the village, and in Kenji's route, the village being burned down is his village, and not only that, but he knows Congo. Likewise, every route's fight with Lavia ends with her spirit being released from the monster and helping you along your journey, except in Kenji's, where it just kinda happens in the background while Kenji receives orders from his subordinate, which is probably a good thing considering how Kenji could have ended the fight by ripping out her heart and crushing it between his fingers. A lot of Tessa's cutscenes feel weirdly detached compared to the other characters. That's because she isn't really fighting for anyone, because she doesn't really interact with or know anyone. She's just kind of on this journey to figure out why the monsters are appearing, which is sort of interesting. The game has incredible art, which is to be expected for a CPS3 game. The characters all move super smoothly and in a really appealing way. The animation is kind of reminiscent of what would later be done in JoJo's, where only a couple parts of their bodies are animated fully, as opposed to the insane over-animation of every single muscle and fiber of cloth in SF3 in the Marvel games. These are all compliments, by the way. And the attacks all have a really snappy, punchy quality to them that makes it really satisfying even to just pull off some jabs. Kinda like Cotton, strangely, this game also features expendable magic attacks and a leveling system. You find these magic orbs inside of chests during battles along with food, and they each have an element to them that you can swap between by pressing start, which I have to imagine is pretty difficult on an actual stick. You can expend an orb to use a character's super attack, or for an elemental attack, which changes depending on which element orb you're using, but stays the same between all the characters. Each boss has an elemental weakness, usually ice, weirdly, and the boss will expunge XP when the attack connects, but you get more XP the more orbs you have left over when the fight ends, so if you're good at the game, I imagine you don't really need to rely on these as much as I do. You get XP from chests, score bonuses, and landing elemental attacks on bosses, and every time you reach a certain threshold of it, you level up, which increases your health, unlocks new attacks, and you know what a level up is, you've played a video game. Importantly though, it also increases the health and therefore the difficulty of the bosses slightly. What makes this a compelling mechanic is that during your playthrough, you're probably only going to get to about level 10 of 32 levels, and that's assuming that you're even able to get that far. And with that, we've arrived at the weirdest thing that Red Earth did. Passwords. You can't save in arcade games. That's kind of the thing I like about them. So I'm kind of failing to see how implementing a password system would at all benefit it. So the passwords don't save your progress, they save your level. So you put in a password and you start over from the beginning of your character's route with the new attacks you've unlocked, essentially bringing grinding into a genre and medium whose whole appeal and purpose is the natural progression of your own skills. And I say that as someone who likes grinding in RPGs. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't having a lot of fun with this game. All the characters felt kinda sluggish and limited with so few moves off the bat. The bosses felt way too powerful compared to you, and they would kill me in only a couple hits. Lavia can fly, and there just isn't a lot of aerial attacks in some of these characters' movesets. And when I finally slogged through it all and made it to Blade, he just kicked my ass. His most basic attacks take away almost a quarter of your health bar and can be cancelled into by the same attack. The game just felt really unfair and unbalanced. I feel like the game was punishing me for not wanting to replay it a bunch of times by locking me out of half my moveset. So I put in a password for a fully maxed out character, and I tried my hardest to make it to the end of the game, but it still felt really bad. In fact, I felt like I was dying even more than before because the boss's health scales with your level. I finally did beat it, eventually, with the bad ending, of course, because of how many continues I used to get there, and it just gave me a really bad taste in my mouth. I felt like I had wasted so much time on a game that I didn't even have fun with. Game's so unplayably broken that even cheating can't make it fun to beat. I felt like I had been cheated. I can't even imagine how horrible it must have been in arcades when you actually had to spend money to play each time. I had pretty much completely lost all the joy that I had when I started these games. This video was originally supposed to come out on Halloween, not even really for any specific theming, just because I wanted to challenge myself with the deadline, but as that drew closer and closer, I realized that I had barely even made progress in the games I was talking about, up to like the second level in every game. Not even for lack of trying, but for lack of skill. These games are hard as hell, that's the point, but when you're trying to analyze every nook and cranny of these games, that just isn't gonna cut it. I literally spent like an entire night just replaying through every game, continue scumming, save state scumming, and I felt my mind fucking deteriorating. I spent a half an hour fighting the final boss in Cotton because every time I got hit I would reload to the start of the fight. I woke up the next day feeling like shit and immediately started replaying more games. Games I had previously loved, I was going through with a constant nagging voice, noticing every tiny fucking detail, every mistake, every death. Even normal shit I would look at and spend the next half hour angrily stewing over it in my mind. To this day, I still haven't gone back to Sinistar. I love Sinistar so goddamn much, but as soon as I started playing it with the thought that I had to get to the third level, I just stopped enjoying it the way I used to. Of course, my deadline passed, and amidst some of the rewrites of my script to fix the, again, very loose Halloween theming, I decided to go back and play some of the games I had been writing about before, mostly because I had pretty much completely fallen off all the other games I was playing before I started grinding out arcade games. And that's kind of when it hit me. It's the whole time I had been coming at it from the angle of a modern console game, but that's not even close to what this game was. Famously so. These games were designed to make money on the side for small businesses, and they're not going to make any money if you're coming in once, spending in one quarter, and never coming back again. By design, you're not going to get very far in a single coin, at least not at first. And also by design, you're not meant to get good in one day, or even in a week. You're meant to be coming back and playing this game for weeks upon weeks, months upon months for some of the harder games, because the target demographic for video games didn't have a lot of money to spare. And not only did that influence the way the game is designed, where whoever was playing it would not have infinite coins, but it also influenced the way that the game would be played, because just one more game had monetary value to it. You couldn't take it for granted. A lot of the design relies on assumptions about the people who would be playing them, correct assumptions at the time, mind you, but these assumptions no longer hold up. So what are you supposed to do? Trying to play these like normal just sort of ends up tiring me out. I never really get to experience the game properly because I'll just be using continues every couple of seconds while trying to regroup, or restarting from the very beginning of the game for hours on end, my brain slowly turning to mush. And I think all it really comes down to is patience. You can't approach these games the same way you would for a game nowadays. You have to play it on its terms. But it's not as simple to play it as it was intended as it would be for another game. It's not just a mod you can install. It's a mindset to install. Introducing Miles Kilometer's 3 to 4 step process to having fun with arcade games. It's foolproof. Step 1, give yourself 5 coins, continues, restarts, whatever. This doesn't have to be set in stone. You can give yourself more or fewer if you'd like. You can cheat if you want to keep playing for a little bit. Step 2, once you run out of continues, stop for the day. It can be really tempting to keep playing, and although it might be seen as a positive that emulation allows you to play as much as you want for free, these games are super difficult, and they were not designed to be played for as long as you would a modern game. You're gonna burn yourself out of the game really quickly, and it's really easy to start seeing everything that goes wrong as a flaw in the game and start getting really frustrated. Give yourself a break, you deserve it. Step 3 only applies to Red Earth. Write down your password. The great thing about Red Earth is that it's a game that was designed around how you'll be replaying it a whole bunch, in a weird kind of meta way. You won't just be replaying the game, not only will you have new skills to try out and old skills to hone your skills with, the bosses will be slightly more difficult, so it's a bit of a new challenge every time. The game might get unfair at times, but you'll have practiced so many different strategies so many times by the time you get to the parts that are really unfair, that you'll be able to handle them fine. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. You just have to keep trying. And don't be afraid to cheese it. You think the Pac-Man World Champion got there by playing fair? You think the second place Pac-Man World Champion got there by playing fair? No, you study the patterns, figure out how the game works and where it doesn't, and exploit that. Arcade games are unfair, and that's the fun of them. Step 4, don't use save states. It's gonna make you worse at the game. Trust me. This might seem like a lot of steps to take to play these games, but if you made it this far into the video and you're still paying attention, you're probably as weird about this stuff as I am. It's really easy to write off a game for not having aged well if it challenges you in any way that's unconventional or strange, or even just kinda difficult, but it's not like people used to just be stupid for considering something good. There was something there that gripped them. The only thing that ages is the circumstances surrounding the game, and there's literally no way to predict how those will change. Remakes of games becoming replacements for them have become increasingly and uncomfortably common, as audiences grow even more opposed to friction in game design, and not only are all of these games way more difficult and strange than would be generally accepted today, they also fundamentally do not work the same way that they used to. That's an extremely glaring issue, one that doesn't really have a great solution right now, other than trying to convince everybody to take on a self-imposed rule set, or re-releasing these games with a completely modified set of mechanics that will ultimately just turn into an entirely different experience. So, I don't know. At the very least, I hope I could have convinced you to give some of these games a shot. I've started becoming a lot more interested in genres that I never really touched before since making this video. I've been playing through Parodius and a bunch of cave shooters since I played Cotton. I was this fucking close to buying a copy of Death Smiles for the 360, but I don't think the mental toll of having the shit that's written on that box on my shelf is worth playing the game at a reasonable frame rate. I used to really not like beat-em-ups that much, but I kinda do now. I used to not like light gun games, but after SHA, I played the first House of the Dead and had way more fun than I thought I would. That shit is like gore Sonic Adventure 2, it's awesome. Killer 7 too, which might as well be an honorary light gun game, right? They updated that shit to add the AI stuff while I was right in the middle of playing it. I have looked into Sinden light guns. I actually beat Red Earth legitimately. I'm actually kind of good at that game now. I've been giving myself more time to really appreciate and stew in the games I play. I've just kind of been taking a different approach to games recently, honestly. I've become more focused on figuring out why a game is good than focusing on why it's bad. It's been really fun and rewarding. I've gotten to experience a lot of great art that I wouldn't have before and in ways that I wouldn't have been able to before. I'm very glad to be talking about this stuff. I'm very glad that so many of you care about listening to me talk about this stuff. Glad to have finished this video finally, and I'm very glad to have gotten to play a fuck ton of arcade games. Thanks for watching. Go play Red Earth.